Hello, Tech Pros, episode 137.
It's important to not be too quick to judge, old code that you might run across, because you don't know what it was like when the person wrote that code. And
Welcome to the podcast where I chat with professionals who are getting the job done using technology 7 days a week. Each week, we start with Motivation Monday. Tuesday is about productivity, Wednesday, leadership, Thursday, technology, Friday, people and communication, Saturday, entrepreneurship, and Sunday, being unplugged. All right, let's get started. Hello, Tech Pros. This is Chad Bostic, and I'm excited to introduce our featured guest today, Aric Watson. Happy Thursday, Aric.
Happy Thursday to you, Chad.
Are you geeked out and ready to talk technology?
Of course I am. I'm excited.
Awesome. Aric Watson is a full-stack web developer with nearly 20 years of experience, currently working for Nexus. Is it called Nexus.net?
Yep, Nexus.net.
Nexus.net, a Michigan-based web hosting company that specializes in hosting high-traffic Magento e-commerce websites. Not Magneto, it's completely different. Magento e-commerce websites. Aric works on internal projects as well as several of Nexus's open Magento extensions. You can find him at various conferences and meetups, and now online here at the Hello Tech Pros podcast.
Sounds great. I'm excited.
Awesome. Well, welcome to the show, Aric. We were joking off the air because I was pronouncing everything incorrectly, including making up frameworks like Magneto e-commerce websites that I don't know if that exists or not. Maybe some of our listeners out there can grab that domain and build a competitor to you guys.
Go for it. Yeah, well, I think Magneto is actually a villain, I think, in the Marvel universe. So I'm guessing pretty much any Magneto name is going to get you in trouble. So I wouldn't recommend that. So. But you're certainly not the first person to make that mistake and use Magneto. I know I've done it, I don't know how many times. And I think used to be if you actually search through the official Magento source code, you'd actually find misspellings like that as well. So it's not uncommon. It's easy to do.
So what is Magento? I have not used that product. I don't have a lot of familiarity with it. So before we dive deep in the weeds on it, just kind of give us an overview of what Magento is and what you guys are using it for.
Sure. So Magento is an e-commerce platform. It runs on PHP, kind of your standard PHP stack of Linux, Apache, or oftentimes Nginx, MySQL, or some kind of a database in PHP. And it's used, I would say it's used somewhere, if you're familiar with WooCommerce, which is an extension for WordPress, that's kind of, I would say, usually used for a little smaller scale stores, whereas Magento is more useful for much larger stores, and especially stores that have to do things like have multiple different languages, or especially want to have like drill down style product organization and things like that. So it's quite popular. In fact, if you look at, I've read all sorts of different research, and it's kind of like the e-commerce area in terms of websites is kind of split right now between Magento and WooCommerce. If you look at the just the number of websites, but as I said, of course, WooCommerce tends to be used for a lot of smaller scale websites. And then Magento is a little higher up. And then once you get above larger than Magento, it's usually custom coded stuff run by very large companies like Ford or whatever.
Awesome. Well, let's dive into it because I've got a lot of questions on the details of maybe some of the architecture or what you get, like specifically the kinds of problems your customers are solving with Magento.
Sure.
But as you know, Aric, on Tech Thursday on Hello Tech Pros, it's all about the past, the present, and future of technology. So maybe we could take a look at the landscape before Magento was around and what customers were using, what e-commerce solutions that people were putting together for their websites, for their mobile apps, for whatever there was, and then the kind of problems that they struggled with before Magento came along.
Gotcha. Well, I mean, I think that going back, Magento got started, I believe, around 2007, and I actually joined Nexus around 2008, and Magento was being coded by a third party, but using our servers. We were one of the first hosting companies to actually host any kind of Magento at all. At that time, there was Zencart. There were a lot of kind of like flaky PHP frameworks for doing e-commerce, but I don't think there was anything that was really as seriously put together as Magento. was in terms of how they looked at the features that it would need, using this kind of database structure that you need to be able to really handle a wide variety of different products with all sorts of different categories and different attributes on the products. And so I think Magento was one of the first kind of serious, players in that area. And it grew kind of, I guess it's been kind of a exponential growth, and Nexus has kind of followed the same growth pattern in that, when I started in late 2007 at Nexus, there was probably 5 or 10 people, and now we have, 150 people and 2 going on 3 data centers. And so it's kind of followed that same trajectory in terms of the overall Magento ecosphere. It's got a very strong community behind it. If you do any, go onto Twitter and just search Magento or real Magento hashtags, you'll see all sorts of stuff. There's all sorts of conferences going on all the time. It's very international, group of people who work on Magento. It's very popular overseas because it really handles multiple languages well. So it's been very exciting to watch it as it's grown over the years, and it's just exploded.
So what was the landscape like back in 2008 when you first started Nexus?
Well, it was very different. I mean, a lot of the technologies that are very popular now in development, such as, of course, all the JavaScript stuff that's been exploding like crazy, wasn't really there. There's jQuery and things along that, frameworks like that, but not kind of like the server side JavaScript like Node and whatnot. That's become so popular since then, and only lasts probably 3 or 4 years. It was kind of the infancy for a lot of things that we take for granted now, like GitHub. Git was around, but I think it was around. I didn't start using it for a couple more years after that. And so there were things like, what was it, CVN and
Right.
CVS. I don't even remember what we used back
SVN
then.
and
SVN, all that subversion.
Yep.
So, it was kind of it's hard to imagine how fast things have changed when you think it's only
Right.
2016, and that's been in 8 years it's changed so dramatically. But then if you go 8 years beyond that, you go back to 2000, and that we were back in the Y2K bug, and the newest hottest technology was like cascading style sheets, and I was still writing stuff in Perl. It was it's a whole different world, and that was only 16 years ago. So it's not to jump ahead too far, but it's hard to imagine where things will be in another 8 years.
Oh, no kidding. That's we'll get to that later on in the episode. But yeah,
Sure.
it has changed so much, and it does blow my mind when I have these kind of conversations and I start thinking back just to some people 8 years ago was forever, but for me it was not that long ago. My daughter is turning 7 this year, and so I'm thinking back to 1 year before my daughter was born. That doesn't seem like that long ago. It was just a blink in time. But looking at the technology, especially at all the web development options, the tool sets for you said like GitHub, this was brand new, or was it even around? Can't remember when I adopted
I'm not
it.
even sure. Yeah.
Holy cow! It's just like all the JavaScript frameworks, everything was just we've changed so much.
Yeah, and think about things like Stack Overflow, or Stack Exchange, which is just critical for web developers these days. In fact, it's kind of the running joke that if that site goes down, the lines of code being written around the internet drops precipitously. And I don't think that was even around 3 years ago, 4 years ago. So I probably could be wrong on the dates, but 8 years ago, it certainly wasn't around. And if you go back to 2000, I mean, Google wasn't around. So
Right.
or if it was, almost no one used it. I remember, the hot search engine was Alta Vista because, you could kind of find things sometimes with it if you were lucky. So it is crazy how fast things change.
So during all this time, you were a PHP developer?
Well, I started out, it's funny, I was in grad school and I started, I had an internship at a local web development company, and I started out just coding HTML as an intern. And then over that summer, by the end of the summer, I was full time, doing that and then finishing up grad school. And so I just kind of grew into this web developer role before I think there were really a whole lot of people out there calling themselves web developers. I didn't even come from a computer science background. I came from a history background and was doing a master's in information science. But anyways, yeah, I kind of grew into that. And then we went from, we started doing some server-side stuff at the company I worked for, and I was using Perl at that point. I used Perl for a very long time, And I started using PHP really around the time, maybe a year or two before I started at Nexus. So like 2006, 2007 is when I started doing that. I had my own web design and development firm with a friend of mine, and so we were just starting to do some PHP in that area. But a lot of that stuff back then was still just static HTML sites for us because they were very small, very small brochureware type websites.
Right. Yeah,
And,
5
and of course, back
pages.
then, it was a lot harder to find something that could reliably host PHP or Perl or whatever. You had to spend. I remember the first server we had for our business was a Rackspace server that was it'd be laughed at now, but it was quite expensive to run.
So you talked about the brochureware, which is very interesting. So what were the types of solutions that your clients were asking for back in this time period?
Back in that time period, it tended to be like people who had a business and didn't have a website yet. And so we always called it brochureware because it was basically the same kind of information you would have on a brochure, you'd have to have on your website, like who you are and what hours are you open. And, typically the only server side thing you might even have is a contact form where, you could put in the contact and have it email the results of the form to somebody. So, and I think there was beginning to be interest in having things like blogs and whatnot with that. I do remember fiddling around with some WordPress sites and things like that back then, but, it was, at least at the scale that we were working at, it was usually much smaller. We did have some larger clients at the university here. I'm based out of Ann Arbor, Michigan, so the University of Michigan, we had some clients that were a little bigger, but even then, like the larger clients initially were static HTML. And I remember writing, Perl systems to generate huge static HTML sites, kind of like some kind of weird, CMS, offline CMS back then. But yeah, it was your typical client was usually a very small, they wanted 5 or 10 pages. And it was really much more about the design process at that level, and the custom design process. And then they would get a custom coded, HTML site that was, it looked great for the time compared to, getting a template or something. But, it it doesn't age well. So a lot of those old sites are still online and they look old now.
They do look old, but I love how you put it, the design process, right? Everyone wanted their custom HTML design because there were a few templates out there, and it was very quick and easy for people to just kind of copy and paste the HTML into another static website, but just change the logo, maybe change the text, like you said, the brochureware, the information of the address and the phone number and all that kind of stuff. So you had thousands and thousands of sites that looked exactly the same.
Yeah.
And people back then were like, okay, but I want it to look exactly like my brochure. I want it to be pixel perfect like my printout looks like.
Yeah. Oh, I remember. Yeah. And of course, even back then, there's still cross-browser issues now, but back then it was far, far worse, especially with the older versions of IE. I remember it was always the thing making me pull my hair out was the Internet Explorer issues.
For real.
Yeah.
So, somewhere around this time, there was this transition to e-commerce. And so as your customers started to mature, right, they went from, okay, we have no web presence to we just want a brochure. At sometime they said, okay, you know what, this internet thing is not going away. We could actually sell our products or sell our services online. So when did you figure out that, okay, you know what, Aric needs to double down into like these e-commerce solutions and really figure out how they work?
Yeah. Well, it was about that time. I mean, we had that business going, and we actually did do some e-commerce sites. I wrote one, it was just a very basic kind of catalog and an order button kind of, shopping cart system in Perl. No, actually, no, that was PHP. That would have been one of my first PHP sites. So even back then, that would have been probably 2007. You could use, you could run queries to authenticate credit cards and do all that stuff. It wasn't as easy as it is now, but it was there. But with that work, we never had a solid enough clientele, or maybe we just weren't good enough salespeople that we could make a living doing that. And so I started looking for full-time work. And, I saw this little Craigslist post from this little company in Ann Arbor called Nexus. And I always joke with the the guy who owns it that, at the time it said that there was an Xbox in the office, and I have yet to actually see that Xbox in any of our offices ever. So I think he's hiding it in his basement somewhere. But
yeah,
it sounded like a cool company to work for, and so I went there. And actually, initially, I didn't do a lot of e-commerce stuff directly with them. My initial work was to work on some internal software that we have that kind of runs the business, and then also to work on the Nexus's own website, which of course, as basically an online company, that was very important to us to have a good online site. And so I did that for a while. I also supported some of our clients with direct development services, which is something we don't do anymore, but at the time we had to do. And then eventually, I started getting pulled more and more into the Magento, black hole as it kind of took over the more and more of our clientele.
So let's get into the specifics of that. So you kind of touched on a little bit of what Magento is, right? It's an e-commerce system. It's for clients that have bigger needs than, say, some of the small startups like WooCommerce would support. Maybe just a blogger who's going to sell, a couple of maybe information products or something like that. So what type of customer does Magento help?
Well, Magento can work. I mean, it at the lower level, you can use it for the same sort of things that you would use WooCommerce for. Like, if you have a store with only 5 or 10 items or something, you can certainly do that. But Magento has a lot of overhead. It's a heavy duty app, web app. And, it also has a very steep learning curve from the developer side of things and also from the hosting side of things. It's not WooCommerce and WordPress, I think, are far easier for someone to kind of get into and to learn how they work and set up a hosting environment to support it. But then once you get into this, kind of heavier duty stuff, which is Magento, then you have a much more complicated task on your hands. The other kind of facet of Magento, which I guess is also similar to WordPress, is that there's a very lively extensions marketplace out there, both for both versions of Magento. I guess I hadn't really mentioned there's Magento 1, which is most of the history of Magento has been Magento 1, and Magento 2 just officially came out within the last 6 months or so. And so now everything's kind of changing. And there's a lot of discussion of whether to stick with Magento 1 or go over to Magento 2 and where's Magento 2 going, etc. But anyways, there's a very lively extension marketplace. So it's quite possible to pick and choose extensions to support whatever sorts of things you're trying to do with Magento. And I think that's one of the keys to its popularity. Similar again to WordPress, that's one of the keys to how WordPress became as popular as it is the ease with which you could pick up extensions to do things on your WordPress site. It's very similar in that regard with Magento.
Okay, cool. So we've got like this pretty big framework that's going to take some people, a little bit of time. So this is not like something that your mom and pop organization is probably going to want to invest in unless they have like an e-commerce team that's kind of managing everything for them, right? This is not something that you're just going to want to install on the server that's running in the back of your office. This is something that you're probably going to want an expert to kind of stand up and host and run for you.
Yeah, and I think that most, speaking from Nexus side of things, most of our clients are either they have a developer on staff, or they're working with a development firm somewhere that does Magento stuff, or they themselves are a developer in addition to being running an e-commerce site. It is a complicated system, especially as you get into customizing it in the ways that you want. I mean, it comes with kind of like a basic store that you can start working with, but once you start deciding how you want to set up things, and of course there's so many different ways you can set up e-commerce, not just in terms of like the products, but different kinds of deals and promotions and tax structures and shopping cart things, and how you want to promote, buy 2 of this and get 1 of that, and all that sort of thing. So it can handle it. It has the customizability and the flexibility to handle just about anything you want to do with it. But that all, of course, comes at the price of a lot of complexity, especially for the developer.
So speaking of complexity, some of the most complex things that I've ever done were the integrations of big systems to other big systems that are in the enterprise, right? Because when you're working for a big company, it's like, okay, we already have all of this stuff that's in place, and now, guess what? We're going to sell this, sell some of our products online. We're going to decide to go to that route, but we've already got a CRM, we've got an ERP, we've got all of these other systems in place, and now we want to take this e-commerce system and we want to bolt it into our existing infrastructure or replace our e-commerce or whatever. So how does the integrations between Magento and other enterprise type software work?
Well, actually, that's also another one of the strengths, I would say, for Magento, in that for many of those sorts of things, that there's likely to be an extension to let it work with other large systems, for example, like Salesforce or OCRM is kind of a Salesforce competitor that's kind of coming onto the stage now. It also has it's very, very customizable. You can basically overwrite any parts of the core code that you need to, which lets you, if you need to, get in and really dig deep into how the Magento system itself works. You can do that. It also supports APIs, SOAP and a REST API, if I recall right. I don't actually deal with that too often, but it has a very strong support, and it needs to, because it needs to work. It needs to be able to be integrated with, for example, inventory systems, warehouse systems, point of sale systems. And there's no shortage of sites that are running, a Magento e-commerce store, but also might have a brick and mortar store that they need to kind of keep things in sync, and they need to sync their inventory with their warehouse system and things like that. So it does support that quite well, and I think that's probably one of the reasons why you see it being used by a little larger organizations than, say, the WooCommerce website, which is typically not going to be used for someone who's running a warehouse, I would guess.
Yeah, probably.
Although you never know.
You never know.
Yeah.
So, Aric, in just a moment, I want to ask you about the extensibility, like how we create customizations to our Magento installations and manage that in concert with like the upgrade of the core product itself, as Magento 2.0 or 2.5 or whatever comes on down the line, as well as just the general future of e-commerce and future of Magento. But first, we're going to take a quick break and thank our sponsors. This episode of Hello Tech Pros is sponsored by Minio Cloud Storage. Minio is a cloud object storage server for developers and DevOps written in Go. The Go programming language is the emerging language of choice for modern cloud infrastructure projects, and it allows Minio to be highly concurrent and lightweight. Minio is Amazon S3 compatible, built with microstorage architecture in mind, but at its heart, Minio is simple, scalable, and supported by a passionate developer and user community. In episode 89 of Hello Tech Pros, I talked with A.B. Periasamy, one of the founders of Minio, about the importance of community support and recruiting software developers who are as passionate about their product's code as artists are of their art. Check out that episode at hellotechpros.com/89 and check out Minio Cloud Storage at minio.io. That's minio.io. Are you new to podcasting? Are you looking for a fast, high-quality, yet budget-friendly podcast production team? Let TransSource Media take care of you. With a team of professional audio and video editors, writers, and graphic artists, they can help you build your podcast from planning, post-production, and platform submission. Using only cutting-edge software and studio equipment, they're here to make each and every show sound at its best. To get a free quote, please visit www.transsourcemedia.com or send them an email at marketing@transsourcemedia.com or call them at 209-505-5693. TransSource Media, transforming businesses through the power of multimedia. Okay, we're back with Aric Watson, full-stack web developer who's working with Nexus, Michigan-based web hosting company specializing in hosting of Magento e-commerce websites. And we've been talking to Aric about Magento, the past, the present, and what all it can do for its customers. So, Aric, you mentioned a couple of times about the huge library of extensions that are out there in the marketplace, and the fact that customers, may have their own software development team, or they're working with software developers to customize the heck out of this platform that they get up and running. So, what's the process like to customize a Magento installation, and how difficult is that to maintain, like, the upgrade paths for your Magento installation, right? So if I'm running on Magento 1.8, and then I've done some customizations, and now I want to upgrade to Magento 2.0, like, is there separation of here's all my customizations in this folder and I don't have to worry about it and I can just like click next, install the 2.0, or is there like a big migration path?
There is, well, there's a big migration path, especially from 1 to 2, because despite the kind of the numbering, it really is a whole new framework. It has a lot in common with Magento 1, but like, for example, you can't just take an extension and expect it to work from 1 to 2, even from 1.9 point whatever to 2 point, whatever. We actually have several extensions that we have open source that are for Magento 1, and one of the things we're talking about internally is which of those should we be working on converting over to Magento 2, and it's basically a rewrite for us to make any of those a Magento 2 extension. In terms of just getting set up on a store, today the biggest question I think for a lot of merchants is, especially if they're just deciding on Magento, is are we going with Magento 1 or are we going with Magento 2? I mean, Magento 2 is certainly the future of Magento. I mean, that's where everyone will theoretically end up over some time span, but it's not clear what that is. And there is still a huge ecosystem of extensions and themes and all that sort of stuff for Magento 1, and they're starting to pop up on Magento 2, but they're not there yet. You asked about extensibility. The Magento actually has the concept of code pools, so that there's the core code, which you shouldn't be messing with. That's Magento's own core code. Then there's a pool for extensions that you get off the internet, the community pool. And then finally there's the local pool, which kind of can override all of those, and that's where you can override the behavior of Magento's own core code, or you can override the behavior of an extension using that local code pool. And that's really kind of one of the cores to how you can customize Magento how you need it, is you can kind of grab the extensions and the themes and whatever that you want, put them into the community pool, and then kind of overwrite them as need be with your own code. And that gives you a lot of flexibility for customizing how your store looks and how your store works.
Gotcha. So that's a lot better than just trying to go in and hack apart the core code, right, of some framework. Some of these frameworks, they just give you, and they're like, okay, well, the extensibility is we open up all the code and it's there, right? And we'll give you documentation on how to tear it apart. But that makes it completely impossible to ever like manage even minor path upgrades, from 2.0 to 2.01.
Yeah.
So I like the fact that this is separated into the core, the community, and the private pool, so that you can kind of add in some customizations without breaking the overall system. But it's very interesting when we're in these situations where like the legacy code still has, or the legacy platform still has all of the community support. Like there's so much out there. And so businesses have a hard time sometimes picking between, do I take a phrase that we used to use in software development all the time is the old and busted versus the new and hotness, right?
Yeah.
So the old and busted may not really be busted. There just may be some new hotness in this new 2.0 stuff that's so catching and so like viable that I'm tempted to go there, but yet the developers, the support, the hosts, just all of the plugins that are available are still for the old and busted. So when is it a good time to make the decision to go to specifically 2.0 for Magento, or just in general the next version of a framework for any system?
That is a hard question, and that's one that I think is really going to have to be a customized question or a customized answer for each particular store, depending on what they have now and what kind of developer resources they have, what the timeline is that they're looking to get a new store stood up. I mean, if I was looking to build a brand new store, I would probably be looking at doing it with Magento 2 at this point. Unless, of course, as I go through and I kind of set up the requirements for the store, if there's a particular extension that's not available for 2 yet, then you're looking at, well, am I going to have to pay a developer to code this? Or if I have my own developers, am I going to have my developers working on this extension for whatever the estimated amount of time is before I can launch the store? But then on the other hand, you don't want to be launching particularly. You may not want to be launching with Magento 1 because, as I said, Magento 2 is kind of where it's going to be. Although I think Magento themselves have announced that they will continue to support Magento 1 for the next few years. So, you don't have to worry about there not being security updates and stuff in the short term. But, eventually you're going to want to move to Magento 2 at some point. So you'll have to think about that. And I think it's also something, speaking from the web hosting side of things, that you want to, if you have an existing store, you're going to want to talk with your host to see, okay, can we move to Magento 2? Do you support Magento 2 yet? What are the resource, changes going to be like? What things are going to be required to run that store at an acceptable, performance level versus Magento 1? They're both very heavy systems, and it can be a never-ending struggle for the stores to build a system on the code side and on the hosting side that'll respond quickly and handle especially spiky traffic, which is always a problem with e-commerce because you tend to have sales and advertising and things that can suddenly bring a rush of traffic to your site, which if it's not prepared for, it can just take the site down.
So let's talk about your company specifically at Nexus and the hosting packages that you guys provide for your customers. So, where are you guys' skill sets? Like, what is the niche, the awesome best customer avatar that you're looking for?
Well, I'd say our niche is high support, kind of. In fact, I've heard I'm not a sales guy, I'm a developer, but I've heard our sales guys say that we're actually more like a Magento support company that also does hosting or something, because we have very, very high level support. We have on-site support, 24/7 phone. You talk to a human who's actually in the data center in Michigan. You're not talking to an outsourced, someone in India or something. But there's a lot of resources that go into that, and we also have we have our own data centers that are all PCI compliant, and we offer in terms of the range of plans. I mean, I think our cheapest. I should look at it real quick because I don't even remember what our cheapest Nexus Magento plan. We also do basically any kind of LAMP stack we do, but Magento is, I would guess, probably our largest set of hosting that we do, especially by dollar amount. But I mean, we start at the lower end starts at $20 a month, and then goes all the way up, and that's for a shared plan where there's a certain number of different customers on one server, right. And we do all bare metal hosting for performance reasons, and then but then we can go all the way up to basically custom clusters, which I've worked on. Client sites where we have 25 node clusters just to support one store, so we can go up to just about anything required. We have I would say we probably have far more Magento experience than anyone else out there, because as I said, the Magento actually got started on our servers way back when, and we've just kind of grown with it. We've always been deeply involved in the community and in the especially in hosting it.
So you said all of your installations are on bare metal for performance reasons. So does that mean nowhere in your data centers, nothing's virtualized? Like everything is a one-off?
Yeah. Well, everything's bare metal. I don't believe we used to. At one point, we used to do some virtual hosting. We've gotten rid of that. Wow. I know that we are working on a quote unquote cloud product. I don't know the details about it at this point. And we do actually, I mean, we do co-location, and we actually have a sister company that does VPSs. So I can't say that there's no machines running virtual stuff in our data center. That's certainly not true. But almost all of our servers are running bare metal at this point.
Well, that's very interesting, because it seems like everybody else I talk to is, if they haven't already gone to virtualize, they're trying to get to virtualize, they're trying to get to quote unquote cloud hosting. They're trying to get to these layers of abstraction where the bare metal just kind of sits there and processes whatever is loaded on it. But the packages, the servers, the services are constantly moving between all the different hardware bits.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot of benefit to having a system like that, and for the web hosting company as well. But in the end, there's still an overhead to running a virtualized environment, and especially for the higher end Magento stores, we've never seen a benefit performance wise, that's worth the cost of that virtualization. Now, I suppose that there's an argument to be made for the cloud stuff when it comes to capacity, so concurrency. So being able to quickly spin up additional nodes as need be. to handle traffic coming in, and that's something that we tend to handle by building out a cluster or whatever to handle high traffic to begin with, so that it's basically the capacity is there when it's needed. And then if we oftentimes will have clients who will find out that they're going to be having a lot of traffic coming in. So, for example, they're going to be featured on a TV show or something like that, like Shark Tank or something like that. Then, as long as we have some lead time, we actually will spin up the hard, the bare metal servers to handle that, and then they can work with our sales team to figure out how long they need those, and then take them down when they need them and things like that.
So we're almost out of time, but we do have a couple more minutes to touch briefly on the theoretical future. So where do you think all this stuff is headed? Magento specifically, but just the e-commerce generally?
E-commerce generally. Well, I think from the hosting side of things, like you were talking about, the cloud stuff is definitely very hot right now, and for good reason. So I think that there's going to be more and more emphasis on that, and it's going to be more and more pressure on companies to figure out how to make that work well for clients, at an affordable level. For Magento specifically, of course, the future is Magento 2. One of the benefits we didn't really talk about much with Magento 2 is it has a lot of the support for the the newer stuff in development, like things like test-driven development. It has tests in it, which Magento 1 doesn't have, and it supports Composer, which is crucial for PHP stuff these days. So, and it has built-in support for things like Varnish, so that it can handle concurrency issues and things like that. So, I think in the short term, that's where Magento is going, is obviously Magento 2. I don't know if there'll ever be a Magento 3 or what that might look like. We'll see. But and I think in e-commerce in general, it's always changing all the time. And I think the newest thing that I've been seeing people talk about is this conversational e-commerce, which honestly I don't even know exactly what that means. But I think that's one of the new buzzwords that's starting to float around in e-commerce.
Is that just like bot driven? You mean?
I think so. So. And I haven't really looked into what it means exactly, because whenever I hear that, I imagine like the phone bots that you talk to when you call an automated support line, and how frustrating and annoying those are. So I can't imagine why it would be a good choice for e-commerce. But hey, maybe I'm wrong. I'm not on the sales side. I'm on the developer side.
Well, I did talk to an individual on this podcast, Lauren Rutledge. She had an episode on a Saturday entrepreneurship where she talked about she has an e-commerce system tied into her Instagram account, and how there's several different software packages where the customers can basically just leave a comment on her pictures that she posts. She has some like clothing lines and stuff like that. So if she posts a picture of a dress or a t-shirt and somebody comments, "OMG, I have to have it. I want to buy it," then a bot can automatically send her an invoice and they can order it. So maybe that's
probably what they're talking about. That sounds much more appealing to me. Not that I don't really use Instagram, but in terms of like a user experience, that sounds a lot better than some of the other ideas that I had, which is more along the phone side of things.
Well, I'll do some research on it, and we'll see if we can find a featured guest who is an expert on conversational e-commerce. Well, we'll get them on the podcast, and we'll find out all about it.
Sounds great.
But Aric, before we leave this conversation, can you wrap us up with the any final words of wisdom that you have for our audience, the best way that we can connect with you, and then we'll say goodbye.
Okay, well, I think final words of wisdom, I guess for me, probably because I've been doing this for so long, is I think it's important to not be too quick to judge, old code that you might run across, because you don't know what it was like when the person wrote that code and what the environment was like. And, the fact that it's still running has something to be said for it. And especially for systems that have been around for a long time, that sometimes you need to think very carefully before you decide to rework those, because there may be a lot of security holes and things that you will introduce, creating a new system that have been tested over time with the old system. And as far as getting in touch with me, you can email me at awatson@nexus.net, or you can reach me on Twitter at adwatson.
Awesome. And we will have all of those links to the best ways to connect with Aric on the show notes page. You can find that at hellotechpros.com/137. This is episode 137. Aric, thank you so much for joining me on Hello Tech Pros today. I really value your insight and your stories and your history and teaching me a little bit about the difference between Magento and Magento.
Well, thank you very much. And actually, I just realized one thing I wanted to put in, which is that Nexus is spelled NEXCESS.net. I realize, as someone who listens to a lot of podcasts myself, I'm sure there's a lot of people out there trying to remember and visualize how it's spelled. So hopefully that'll be helpful for someone.
Cool, and we'll have it linked up. We'll have it linked up on the show notes.
Thank you.
Awesome. Tech Pros, man, you always have this decision on when to upgrade, when to look for the latest and greatest, and when to take with something that's trusted that the community supports, and it's never easy. If it is easy, then I would really take a step back and just go out, get a cup of coffee, come back and think about it with a fresh set of eyes, fresh set of ears, maybe pitch the idea to somebody else. Is it really time to upgrade? Is it really time to get the latest and greatest? Or does the old one just work? Is it great? And is it just more supported than the new stuff? And have a hard conversation about it.
Yeah, and I think you need to think as well about, it's very difficult to estimate the amount of time that might take to recode something, even to refactor existing code, but to rewrite something from scratch can be very difficult to know even what kind of cost you're looking at to kind of do the cost-benefit analysis.
Yep, tough to estimate.
It's hard.
Very tough. You've been listening to Aric Watson, and I'm Chad Bostic. And until next time, take care.
Thank you.
The show notes page for this episode can be found at hellotechpros.com/137. Do you use Slack for team communication? Join the Hello Tech Pros Slack channel at hellotechpros.com/Slack. If you enjoyed this episode, please leave a review, subscribe to this channel, and check back tomorrow. This has been Technology Thursday, but tomorrow my featured guest and I discuss people and communication. On Saturday, we talk entrepreneurship, Sunday, being unplugged, Monday, motivation, Tuesday, productivity, Wednesday, leadership, and back again on Thursday to discuss technology once again. And I'll talk to you tomorrow.